At sunrise, the Colosseum awoke with a low, thunderous hum. Its great arches glowed in the red light of dawn, not golden or warm, but the color of blood. The sand below shimmered faintly, soaked from the day before. The smell of iron, sweat, and fear drifted through the air. Beneath the stands, handlers dragged starving beasts into cages. Lions, leopards, and bears, their ribs showing, their eyes wild. The crowd poured in by the thousands, voices rising like a storm. Children laughed. Vendors shouted. And somewhere, deep in the tunnels, a man whispered a prayer he knew would not be answered. Above them all, Rome waited for the show to begin. To the Romans, this wasn't cruelty, it was culture. Because in their world, death wasn't the end, it was the main event. By the end of this video, you'll see how Rome turned death into its favorite form of entertainment. The Roman arena wasn't just sport, it was a mirror. Every scream that rose from the sand echoed the empire's hunger for control. When the emperor smiled, thousands died, and every cheer from the stands was a promise of loyalty shouted into history. These weren't games. They were lessons written in blood. Each fight, each hunt, each execution reminded the people who held power and who did not. The Colosseum wasn't a monument of stone. It was a machine built to keep fear alive and obedience stronger than mercy. Let's step inside those sands and uncover the spectacles that made even Rome gasp. It didn't start with glory. It started at a funeral. In 264 BC, when Decimus Junius Brutus Scaever lost his father, he didn't honor him with statues, gold, or prayers. Instead, he chose something darker. In the crowded Forum Boarium, where cattle once traded hands, he gathered the people of Rome to witness his devotion. 3 pairs of slaves were brought out, armed, and ordered to fight to the death. The smell of dung, sweat, and smoke filled the air as the crowd pressed in. Blades clashed, blood spilled, and when it was over, silence hung heavy. It was called a munus, a duty, an offering to the dead. To them, this was not entertainment. It was sacrifice, but Rome never left an idea untouched for long. What began as a ritual of grief soon caught the attention of the powerful. They saw something in the crowd's eyes, a spark, a thrill, a strange unity born from shared horror. Their families copied the idea, turning funerals into public shows. The poor came for bread and distraction. The rich came for status and spectacle. Slowly, duty turned into theater. The dead were still honored, but now the living craved the sight of blood. By the 3rd century BC, the Senate began sponsoring these games, calling them offerings to the gods, but everyone knew the truth. They were politics dressed as piety, violence disguised as virtue. Every fight reminded the people of Rome's power, its reach, its order, its control. The blades that once served the dead now served the empire. Rome had discovered something powerful. Death could unify the living. Next came the beasts, dragged from deserts, jungles, and rivers to feed Rome's hunger for spectacle. Lions from North Africa, elephants from India, leopards from the Caucasus, and crocodiles from the Nile were all trapped and shipped in chains. Even giraffes, strange and graceful, were torn from their lands and sent across oceans. When Julius Caesar displayed the first giraffe ever seen in Europe, the crowd gasped, not in wonder, but in excitement. The animal wasn't admired. It was condemned. Moments later, it was thrown into the arena where claws, teeth, and blades ended its brief appearance. These hunts, called venations, weren't about survival or skill. They were about domination. The Romans called it entertainment, but it was a performance of power. The empire could summon creatures from the ends of the earth, starve them, chain them, and destroy them in a single afternoon. Behind the cheers, handlers worked through the night, keeping the beasts barely alive until showtime. Archaeologists later found bones marked with deliberate starvation, proof that even the dying were prepared for drama. When the Colosseum opened under Emperor Titus, over 9,000 animals were slaughtered in one festival alone. The sand turned black with blood. The crowd cheered as lions were speared, bears burned, and elephants collapsed. But beneath the spectacle lay something deeper. The message was clear. If Rome could conquer nature, it could conquer anything. The empire's reach wasn't just over men and nations, but over creation itself. Rome didn't just conquer people, it conquered nature. And in the Colosseum, extinction was entertainment. Forget noble duels. Most fights in the arena were rigged, one-sided and cruel. The image of two skilled warriors locked in fair combat was a fantasy Rome liked to sell, but the truth was far darker. Many of those who stepped onto the sand were prisoners, slaves, or condemned criminals. Some were handed wooden swords, others blunt blades that couldn't pierce armor. They weren't meant to win. They were meant to die beautifully. The crowd wanted blood, and Rome delivered it with precision. Some helmets were built to narrow a fighter's vision until he could barely see the blade coming. Others were so heavy they crushed the necks of those forced to wear them. It wasn't just a fight, it was humiliation crafted into steel. Even women were dragged into the spectacle. Female gladiators, called gladiatresses, were thrown into combat against dwarfs, wild beasts, or even each other. The Romans laughed, pretending it was novelty. But it revealed something deeper. No one, not even women, was beyond Rome's appetite for cruelty. The purpose wasn't victory or entertainment alone, it was control. Every cheer reinforced the empire's power, every drop of blood was proof that Rome owned life and death. These contests reminded citizens that rebellion had no reward, mercy had no place, and obedience was the only path to survive. The Romans cheered not because it was fair, but because it reminded them who ruled. By midday, the arena turned into a stage. The morning's duels ended, but the cruelty was far from over. The crowd stayed, hungry for something new. What came next was theater written in blood. Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Prisoners, criminals, and slaves were forced to act out famous myths, but there was no acting here. Each story ended the same way, with real death. One man played Orpheus, the musician who could charm wild animals with his song. But in the arena, his music didn't tame anything. As he strummed, a cage opened, and a bear tore him apart while the audience laughed. Another man was cast as Daedalus, the inventor who built wings to escape his prison. Suspended high above the sand, he flapped desperately before falling to the beasts below. Then came Prometheus, bound to a rock as vultures pecked at his flesh, only this time it wasn't myth, it was murder. The executions didn't stop there. Men and women were crucified in rows, while crowds drank and cheered. Others were wrapped in pitch-soaked shirts, the tunica molesta, and set on fire, turning them into living torches that burned as night fell. Even naval battles were staged inside the flooded arena, with real ships and real men fighting until the water turned red. These weren't stories of heroism, they were mockeries of faith, twisted into lessons of fear. Rome had learned how to turn its legends into tools of control. In its thirst for spectacle, it rewrote beauty into brutality, art into execution, and faith into horror. Even their gods weren't safe from the emperor's imagination. When you give absolute power to absolute egos, you get madness dressed as majesty. Caligula, Rome's wildest showman, grew bored of watching others die. One afternoon, when the beasts ran out, he simply pointed at the crowd. Guards dragged random spectators into the sand, and the entertainment continued. His message was simple. No one was safe, not even the audience. Fear was part of the show. Then came Nero, a man who thought he was an artist trapped in an emperor's body. He turned executions into theater and called it beauty. Prisoners were forced to die in elaborate performances while he played his lyre, believing himself a god of art and mercy. He burned Rome, then sang about it. To him, pain was poetry, and the screams were applause. But no one embraced the arena quite like Commodus. Dressed as Hercules, he strutted into the Colosseum, armed with a bow and a smile. The beasts were crippled, the fights were staged, but the cheers were mandatory. He even fought gladiators, but only those too weak to strike back. Losing was impossible, clapping was required. What began as a test of bravery had become a one-man circus of ego and fear. Each emperor tried to outdo the last. spilling more blood, inventing new horrors, and calling it glory. They ruled not with wisdom but with performance. And in the end, the arena that crowned them also unmasked them. Caligula was murdered by his guards, Nero took his own life, and Commodus was strangled by his own champion. The same theatre that made them gods destroyed them. Not every Roman cheered. Beneath the roar of the crowds, a few voices dared to question what the empire had become. The philosopher Seneca, a man who once sat close to power, confessed that watching the games left him feeling hollow. He wrote that the midday executions didn't cleanse the soul, they poisoned it. Each scream, he warned, made men crueler, stripping away their humanity piece by piece. But his words were whispers against a storm of applause. Even Cicero, long before Seneca, sensed the danger. He praised bravery, but condemned cruelty for cruelty's sake. To him, violence without honor was rot hiding under the mask of civilization. Yet even Cicero admitted that politicians fed the mob what it wanted, bread and blood. To govern meant keeping the people entertained, no matter the cost. Then came the Christians, who saw the arena as the empire's darkest sin. They refused to watch, refused to cheer, and for that defiance, they were thrown into the same sand they condemned. To the believers, these were not games. They were a glimpse of hell made real. The writer Tertullian called them the seeds of cruelty, proof that Rome's heart had turned against itself. A few saw the truth, that a nation that learns to love suffering begins to decay from within. But by the time anyone listened, the empire's heart had already hardened. The cheers had grown louder than conscience, and Rome mistook cruelty for strength. By the 5th century, the Colosseum fell silent. The roars that once shook its walls were gone, replaced by the soft breath of wind through broken arches. The seats that had overflowed with citizens now lay empty, cracked, and covered in dust. The empire that once ruled the world had crumbled under its own weight, its power eaten away by greed, pride, and blood. The games that once united Rome became a memory, a shadow of a time when death was a form of celebration. The sand that once drank the blood of thousands now lay still, and the echoes of cruelty faded into stone. The empire's hunger for spectacle had devoured itself. The cost of keeping the crowds entertained grew too high, the beasts too rare, the coffers too empty. What began as glory ended in exhaustion. The people who had once cheered for death were now surrounded by their own ruin. The Colosseum, once the heart of Rome's pride, became its grave marker. A civilization that turns cruelty into culture doesn't survive its applause. Walk its tunnels today, and you can still feel it. The chill of what was once joy, the weight of what was once normal. The arches still stand, proud but scarred, each stone whispering the same warning. Empires fall not just from invasion, but from the rot of their own amusement. The Colosseum may be quiet now, but its silence speaks louder than any crowd. Listen closely, and you can still hear the echoes, not of victory, but of warning. So tell us, which spectacle do you think revealed Rome's darkest soul? Was it the hunts that turned wild beasts into victims, the plays that mocked the gods, or the emperors who bathed in the cheers of fear? Each act exposed a different face of the same truth, that power, when left unchecked, always feeds on suffering. History remembers the marble and the glory, but beneath it all lies the sound of chains, the cries of the condemned, and the silence that followed. If this journey through Rome's shadow gripped you, subscribe. It helps us keep unearthing the truths that history tried to bury. Every ruin has a voice, every legend hides a cost, and together we can keep bringing those forgotten stories back to light. Because the past isn't gone, it's waiting to be heard.